Hi there, I'm Ben from the Merrimack Public Library, and this is If You Know, You Know Kitchen Survival. Today, I'm going to be showing you how to bake your own bread using the easiest bread making recipe that I've ever made, Chef John's No Knead Ciabatta recipe. This is a great one for people who are interested in starting out making bread. You don't need much in the way of equipment, you don't need to really practice any special techniques or anything. It's just a very straightforward, simple bread that gives you a nice, airy, crispy on the outside, delicious ciabatta bread at the end. So, without any further ado, let's get started. So, here we've got pretty much everything that we're going to need to make our bread. We've got some white flour, wheat flour. This is totally optional. If you don't have any wheat flour, you can use all white, it'll still be great. We've got some water, some salt, some yeast, measuring cup, measuring spoons, and a container to mix it all up in. Your container does not need to be anything like this big. This is just the one I've got handy. A decent sized medium to large bowl will do just fine too. Before we get started, one more thing we should talk about. This is a no-knead recipe, which means it's going to sit out for a long time before we can bake it. Altogether, we're going to put this in the oven about 20 hours after we start. So, whatever time you're starting, roll back 4 hours, and that's when you're going to bake. So, plan accordingly. If you want bread for dinner, you might want to start a little bit after dinner. If you want bread for lunch, mid-afternoon, something like that. So, with that out of the way, let's get started. Oh, before I forget, if you're doing ingredients, you're also going to want some olive oil and some cornmeal and a rimmed baking sheet to finish this recipe off. Alright, so we're going to want 3.5 cups of all-purpose flour here. So I've got a half cup measure here, so that's going to be 7 of these. That's 1. Now, often bread baking, they will say it's better to go by weight than by volume because your flour can get kind of compressed. It can change a little bit. That's 3. This is a pretty forgiving recipe, so I'm just going to follow Chef John's advice and use volume for this one. So far, all the time, every time I've done it, it's been fine. 4, 5, 6, and level that off, 7. All right, and then one more half cup of wheat flour. Again, if you use all white flour, go for a full 4 cups rather of white flour. It'll be maybe a little less nutty flavored, but it'll still be a totally delicious bread. All right, so that's 8 cups of flour. We're going to also want a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. Active dry yeast or instant yeast should both work for this. If I can open. 1 sec. Okay, so I'm going to get a 1/4 teaspoon of our yeast. Add that in there. And next, 1.5 teaspoons of salt. So I'm just going to pour this over a little ramekin so I don't spill too much. 1 teaspoon, and then a half teaspoon. And lastly, we're going to add 2 cups of warm water. If you like, you can use bottled water for this. Tap water should be okay. If you're going to get very into bread baking, people say tap water because of like the fluoride or whatever in it can be a little, can mess with your yeast a little bit. And when I say warm, if you're going to go by temperature, between 90 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but if you're not being that particular, just don't make it hot. Anything over 110 degrees is going to kill your yeast, so make sure it's just warm. And then so we're just going to mix this together until we get everything incorporated. It's going to seem like there's not enough water, but just keep mixing and it should all come together into a nice smooth ball. If not, that's a time when you can add a little water a little bit at a time until it sort of evens out, but make sure you give it a good minute or two of just stirring before you try adding any more water to it. Get a closer angle here. You can see how that's all coming together. Got a little bit of unincorporated flour here. We're just going to keep going at this for a good minute or two. If you do decide to add water, really go slow, like a tablespoon at a time or so. The proportions of water to flour can really be pretty small to make a difference for your dough. So yeah, so as we go, and the reason this dough sort of changes how sticky it seems over time is the water takes a minute to incorporate and hydrate all that flour. But this is looking right about where we want it. Getting fairly sticky. Everything is all worked together. So now I think we can leave this to do its thing. So now that we've got everything mixed together, we're going to let this sit in a not too warm, just a room temperature place for 18 hours. So again, if you're doing the math, go back whatever time it is when you hit this point, whatever time it is now, go back 6 hours and come back to it tomorrow. You're going to want to cover this up so it doesn't dry out. I'm going to use just the lid here. Tin foil would work great as well. And I'll be back with you guys tomorrow to show you the next step. Alright, so it's been 18 hours, and as you can see, our dough has gotten considerably bigger in that time. And very bubbly. It's not exactly 18 hours, it's not necessarily a big deal. Mine might be a little deflated, might have gotten a little too warm. If your environment is warmer, you might want to go a little shorter on it. And so what I'm doing, I'm just going to go around the outside, scrape it down, make sure I'm getting all of the dough from the edge, and scrape it into the center so it doesn't stick to our container. And if you look closely, the stretchiness there, that's all of the gluten strands that we've developed over this long room temperature rest. That's going to help the bread puff up more. Basically, the gluten, when it's developed, which you can do either with this long rest period or by kneading, that's why this is a no-knead recipe, traps the gas produced by the yeast. And that's what makes your bread get those nice air bubbles in it and not get very stodgy. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is shape our loaf. So since this is a very sticky dough, one trick we can do, we can take some plastic wrap and a spray bottle full of water, and we spray a little water down on our work surface and stretch our plastic wrap over it. The plastic wrap won't move very easily, it'll stick. Alright, so now that we've got our plastic wrap down, we're going to dust this with some flour. Again, to help the bread from sticking. And now we are just going to coax our dough out onto it. Next, we just want to stretch this out into sort of a long log ciabatta loaf shape. You can use your hands, use a spatula. Might want to hit it with some flour on top first. That doesn't stick as much. Gently stretch this out. We'd like it to be pretty even. So if you can just even that out. All right, that's looking about where we want it. So next we need to prepare a pan for this. Okay, so we're going to bake this on a heavy half sheet pan, like you would for something like cookies or what have you. And we're going to want some olive oil and some yellow cornmeal. So first we're just going to do a drizzle of the olive oil on here. Make sure that's spread out. You can use a brush, you can use your fingers, you can use a paper towel. Just want to get it so the whole pan has some oil on it. Yeah, that'll do. And then we just want to give this a generous coating of our cornmeal. Oops. A little lighter than that over the areas, I would think. Let's see. All right, now we got plenty of cornmeal down here. And now we're ready to transfer our bread over to our baking tray. All right, so now to get the bread onto our baking tray, we're gonna lift the whole thing up to the edge here. Oh, we don't want this lip to come over the top. And then we're just gonna flip the whole thing. All right, and flip. And mine's sticking a little, probably could have floured the outer edge a little more here. That's all right. So, make any final adjustments to the shape. Even it out if it got a little goofed up when you were flipping it, which is fine. And give it a little last hit of flour if it's still a little sticky on top. And then we're going to just cover this with a kitchen towel and let it rise for 2 hours. So I'll see you in 2 hours. Okay, so it's been 2 hours, so we can take this off and see our loaf has risen a little bit, sort of more gone out than up, but that's fine for this bread. This step here, where we shape the loaf and then we let it sit for a little while longer to rise, is called proofing. And the main idea is that we want to get some more gases back in from the yeast, working on the flour, eating all of the sugars in there, and that'll make more air bubbles in our bread to make it lighter. And the gluten that we've developed will trap that in so it won't go out of the bread, and it'll make those nice air pockets. So a rule of thumb for proofing is you can do what's called the fingertip test. You want to poke like maybe half an inch or so in, and what you want to see, let me try and get you right up close to here. What you'd like to see is if it springs back right away, all the way, it's still could get a little bit more. It's a little underproofed. It could still go a little further. But if it doesn't spring back at all, it's overproofed. It'll might deflate a little bit in the oven. So what you want is for it to spring back slowly and not quite all the way, which is what we've got. So we're ready to bake, and I've got my oven preheated to 425 degrees, and we're just gonna slide it on in. So oven mitts, always a good idea when you're working with a hot stove. You want one of these, you want this in probably the middle rack. And we're gonna bake this for 35 to 45 minutes, or until it is golden brown on the outside. So here's our final product. I checked on it at 35 minutes and decided it was about where I wanted it, so pulled it out and have let it cool off. Um, this is probably about the color you want. If you'd like to be more precise about the internal temperature, you've got something like this, like a temperature probe. Um, Done for bread is around 190 to 200, and it'll be cooked through at that point. If you get too much higher than that, you might be getting a little bit overdone. So as you can see, it didn't puff up a ton here, but sometimes bread is just finicky like that. Still gonna taste perfectly good. So let's cut into this guy. Yeah, you can see it's got a nice squishy inside, a crunchy exterior. You can hear it crackle. So yeah, we'd like it a little bit airier in there, ideally, but what are you gonna do? This is a good one for learning on because it doesn't take that much effort. It only took like half an hour to 45 minutes. Maybe an hour if you need to find all your stuff, of me actually working on it, and the rest was just waiting for it to do its thing. One last thing, the reason I've let this guy cool off before I cut into it is if you cut into bread that's fresh out of the oven, you're going to let some of the steam out, which can mess up your internal texture. So it's usually recommended that you give it an hour or so until it's cooled down to nearly room temperature. And if you would like to do warm bread, because warm bread is great, you can always toss it back into the oven at a low temperature for a few minutes before eating. All right, so there you have it. A nice, simple Italian bread, courtesy of Chef John's recipe. This is a great one for playing around with because it's pretty easy, and you can really sort of get a sense for if you stop it sooner when you're letting it proof, or if you let it go a little longer, how does it change, that sort of thing. So I hope you guys give this one a try if you're interested in baking bread, and till next time, I've been Ben from the Merrimack Public Library. Bye.